After 2.5 years, the trial connected to the largest corruption scandal in Ohio history is starting next week. Republican former House Speaker Larry Householder and former Ohio Republican Party Chair Matt Borges were arrested in June 2020 in a $61 million bribery scheme in exchange for passing the nuclear and coal power plant bailout known as House Bill 6. Other defendants have admitted guilt and one is dead. But Householder and Borges have always maintained their innocence. Statehouse correspondent Andy Chow will be covering the trial and is here for a preview. So let's go back in time to 2019. House Bill 6 passes, and then there was an effort to try to overturn it. Then that brought the effort to stop the effort to overturn it. And then we end up in 2020 with Larry Householder, Matt Borges, and the other folks arrested. So tell me, what does this trial really focus on here?
So a good way of looking at it is to look at how much money was coming in and what the purpose of that money was for. And there are really three sections for that. First, there was money that was coming into this 501c4 operated by Larry Householder, allegedly, that was for him and his personal and political gain to help Larry Householder become House Speaker again and therefore pass something like HB 6. Then the second round of money was for HB 6 to advocate for it, to push lawmakers for it, to gain public appeal for it, and then to also fight back against that referendum effort with that counter petition. And then from there, it was to continue this going forward, to continue to help Householder in any way possible. In the end, federal prosecutors say there's more than $60 million flowing through these different dark money groups into the pockets of Larry Householder and his quote-unquote enterprise from First Energy, and First Energy has gone so far as to admit to this through their deferred prosecution agreement.
For which they'll pay a $230 million fine. And so this goes back even before 2019, before Larry Householder became Speaker. I want to ask you about House Bill 6 in this case, though. The judge, Judge Black, has told Householder that he can't be using House Bill 6 as a defense to defend his allegedly criminal actions.
Yeah, so when you hear people talk about all the allegations that have come out against Householder and then have wrapped HB 6 into it, there have been plenty of people who have said, well, HB 6 was good policy. That's something that I agreed with. And with what the judge is saying and where the prosecution is probably going to land on this too, is that it has nothing to do with whether people think that there should have been a bailout to save these jobs at the nuclear power plants. What it has to do with is this bribery scheme where money was flowing through dark money groups, and there was some sort of alleged pay-to-play scandal here, quid pro quo, where Householder was paid money to become House Speaker and then in return pass legislation for First Energy.
Now, it should be said there are House Bill 6 defenders, but House Bill 6 doesn't look the same way it did. I mean, the nuclear power plant part of that, the bailout part, is done.
Yep.
There are still bailouts for 2 coal-fired power plants. There was the ending and the curtailing of energy efficiency programs. This was a sweeping energy bill.
It was a huge energy bill, and the thing to keep in mind is all the things that HB 6 accomplished were things on the legislative agenda for First Energy. So there was sort of this clear breadcrumbs leading back to First Energy from the beginning.
Speaking of First Energy, the case and the deferred prosecution agreement and the $230 million fine led to a huge shakeup at First Energy.
Yeah, First Energy, their former CEO was booted. There were 2 executive vice presidents who were also fired. There was another CEO that took charge, and then he has also resigned too. Lots of different board of trustees members have been changed too. There's been a big shakeup at First Energy. They really say that they're pushing forward on accountability and transparency to make sure this kind of thing doesn't happen again.
And this is in federal trial. The rules are different for federal trial. We won't see pictures from federal court and that sort of thing. How long do you expect this to go on, and who do you expect to hear from during this trial?
So the prosecution and the defense have set aside about 4 to 6 weeks to allow this trial to go forward. There's millions of documents to pore over and to go over. I think what's the most interesting thing here in the trial brief is, what do these undercover officers have to say and what kind of evidence are they going to bring forward? In the trial brief, it says that there are secret recordings that happened with the defendants, and if those are played in court, that's going to be really interesting.
And we've also heard that Attorney General Dave Yost has been subpoenaed. There are some lawmakers who've been subpoenaed as well.
Yeah, and there's apparently some other people that we don't even know of who have been granted immunity. So there are some like backdoor deals that may have happened, and so is there going to be some surprise witness to take the stand who may have played a role in all of this that now comes forward, and we learn even more that we didn't know before.
This case is incredibly complex, but it's also historic.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to watch. Like you said, this has been known as the biggest corruption scandal in Ohio history, so to see it all play out is going to be really interesting.